my talk says I'm talking about life and death at the mission San Francisco, Solano, which we're standing in, or we're standing on. We're not actually in it, but we're on it. But I'm going to talk about that and some other things. Now, I'm trained as a scientist, but most of my life I identify more with artists and poets and dancers. Not that I dance, but I use some poetry and art from time to time. And over the years, I realized that my presentations are more art than science. So I'm warning all the experts in the room, if I mess up a little date, give me some slack there. Because this is going to be a different type of presentation. This one I'm really looking forward to doing. So, indigenous life before Euro-American contact. Try to say that 3 times really fast. I don't want to talk about life and death at the Sonoma Mission without talking about what came first. And then also what came later. There was a time when probably there were no humans in California. I say probably because that's the point would be. The scientists would say, well, yeah, there has to be an origin point. But it changes. And currently, we know now that people have been on the West Coast for 17,000 years because there was a study that was published in, I think, Science Magazine 2 weeks ago that said, yes, in Idaho we have a 17,000-year-old site. That's kind of cool. Quite likely, in some of our lifetimes, we'll know that people have been here at least 30,000. And who knows? But 30,000, I think, is a pretty good figure. But we don't have a 30,000-year site yet. But you know the difference in 17 and 30 doesn't matter because they're both old. And the people that were here, that are still here, some of whom are in this room tonight, have been here for a very, very long time. Essentially since the beginning. And that's what our world looked like 15,000 years ago, or 17,000 years ago, when we know people were showing up. Kind of a little bit of paleontology. So look at all the animals in this painting, with the exception of the muskox. This guy right here, who I don't think we had, or we haven't found yet. All those other critters we had right here in the North Bay. Would have been incredible to see, like the Serengeti. And this is what people discovered, walked into, lived with, and they didn't go out and slaughter all the predators. Probably had the ability to, but they lived with the bears, the lions, and the tigers. That's where it's specifically lying. And this is also what the world looked like 15, 18,000 years ago. You could walk from San Francisco to the Farallon Islands and not get your feet wet. You might have to jump over some puddles, but you could actually get out there, or to the Cordell Banks. So imagine the archaeological history and the cultural history now submerged under that big, broad prairie plain I call the Farallon Plain. Let's talk about people. I wrote a series of articles in the Kenwood Press earlier this summer that you might have seen that was looking at prehistory sort of as an economist. Not that I'm an economist, and I wanted to talk about productivity, growth, wealth, and globalism. And so I just thought I'd really quickly talk about life here. And I'm not going to do like, well, 12,000 years ago people did this, 8,000 years ago they did that. I'm going to talk about something different. So I'm going to talk about productivity. Baskets have been around for a very long time. Archaeologists will tell you at least 10,000 years, but trust me, it's been longer than that. And baskets were an incredible invention because if you dropped the basket, it didn't break. Now, I know people that say, well, the California Indians didn't make pottery. That's not true. In the desert, they did. And around Clear Lake, they knew how. But they didn't really have a need because the baskets were so much better. You could cook in them. They could hold water. They could hold a child. They could hold your treasures. They could hold your food. And some of the baskets were just so well designed that it allowed people to do more and more and more activities, like carrying food in from the meadows, from the oak grove. It became more productive. Anthropologists used to say, oh, to be a hunter and gatherer, that's all you did. You were just chasing deer and chasing acorns, and it was hard to feed yourself. But when you look at the facts, this was a better lifestyle than the people growing maize in the Southwest, because people here had lots of free time because there was so much food. It was so easy to gather, especially if you had these big burden baskets. So, productivity. I've known several Native friends. I've been blessed in this life to have a number of Native families that I felt like were my family all over the state. And in more than one case, I've been in homes where the family takes out the baskets and feed them or talk to them. And it's kind of like petting your dog, but not quite. It's kind of like talking to your favorite house plant, but not quite. And the longer you watch, you start realizing these baskets. I don't know if it's all baskets. Some of these baskets are imbued with life, spiritual life, and they have to be cared for. These are some of the most beautiful baskets in the world, and that's why curators of museums all over the world used to do anything to get their hands on baskets from our area. Pomo baskets, Miwok baskets, Wapo baskets. Gorgeous. Those are bird feathers on the one on the upper left. Shell beads. These are called treasure baskets or sun baskets. You wouldn't cook in these. These would be for treasure. This would be for important things, or the basket itself would be important. Other type of baskets for food processing. You can kind of see how once you've got these really lightweight burden baskets, you can really be productive. Instead of having to make 5 trips out to Oak Grove, maybe you only do 1. You come home, you sit around the fire with your grandkids and you tell stories or you sing. That's a pretty cool invention. And you can store acorns in granaries. Now, I'll talk about acorns in just a minute, but they had woven basketry granaries as well. You had to have them up so that the mice didn't get into them. You had to protect them from the birds and all, but you could store acorns in there for a couple of years. Wealth. Anybody know what obsidian is, or does everybody know what obsidian is? The black volcanic glass that we find at Annandale, over on the Silverado Trail in Napa Valley, up around Clear Lake. Obsidian was one of the most desired lithic materials in the world. And anywhere in the world where people had access to obsidian quarries, they were wealthy. Now maybe they didn't have gold bars in the bank somewhere, but they had a lot of IOUs. They had a lot of exchange. And the obsidian, especially the really good obsidians, would travel forever. I was on a site in northern Florida once, and we found obsidian that was traced to Yellowstone. The Napa obsidian that comes from the valley over goes all through California, because it was such an important trade item that people wanted it. And the people that lived beside the quarries were wealthy, because they had something to trade. They could trade it for salt, for venison, for dried fish. And then globalization. Money, the concept of money, has been invented several times over the course of history. And it's been invented probably several times in California. But the one I'm most interested in is the last time, which was about 500 to 600 years ago, among the Pomo, and to some extent also the Miwok here. Taking clamshell disc beads and making them into money beads that could be exchanged with people that you didn't even speak their language. I've seen old photos of traders, Native American traders, who had tattoo marks on their arms, and it was for pulling strings of beads. And you're trading, and that person has obsidian, and they come to your community to trade for dried fish, and you're bartering in shell beads. So it's money. It's amazing. If the Spanish and the English and the Americans had stayed away for another 1,000 years, that money would have created some really interesting things here. But just about the time the money was taken hold and people were beginning to exchange, it's all blew up. We'll get to that in just a minute. Here are the people. These are the two on the right. Were painted at Mission Dolores, San Francisco, Assisi, 1812, I believe. The lower left, about 1818, by Russian artists, and then the upper left, I forget the history of that one. That's at Mission San Jose. But all local people. The people on the upper left are doing a dance. Lower right are probably going to a ceremonial or dance. The upper right are at the mission. The guy upper right, lower right, looking at us with a sad face, came from Old Poly Village, right across the river over here in Marin. And in the lower left is just sort of a generic, this is what they look like, drawings. Very beautiful people, very diverse people, speaking all different types of languages. We had in our area right here, this is more or less Coast Miwok territory. And southern Pomo is right up around Kenwood, San Jose, or San Rosa. So we had southern Pomo, Coast Miwok, Wapo, just over Napa Valley, and then Patwin down toward Vallejo. So you have four I'm going to call them tribes tonight. They're bigger than tribes, but 4 groups right here, all speaking their own languages. That's why you have to have traders that can either speak a lot of languages or have the beads and the tattoo marks. It was, there's only one place in the world that had as much linguistic diversity as this part of California, and that was New Guinea. And they're about the same. New Guinea and, Northern California. And if you look at the topography, it's very similar. Anybody been to New Guinea? Yeah, a lot of rivers and mountains and valleys, and people move in, they love it, and they stay. And then more and more, and you get a lot of linguistic diversity in a case like that. Maybe on a wide plain, not as much. So here's a typical village. This is actually, I think, Santa Barbara. So don't look closely, or you'll see a Chumash dancer over there. I'm not sure how many people recognize a Chumash dancer, but that was supposed to be a little closer to home. But the point is that Native people here, all through this part of California, built with biodegradable materials, whatever was nearby. Bundles of tules, bundles of grass, redwood slabs. And 1,000 years later, you don't see it. You might see a little bit of a pit where a house stood, but you don't see the structures. Now, everyone familiar with the Southwest, you see structures, because the Anasazi didn't have some of the same resources to work with. They didn't have tules, they didn't have redwood, but they had a lot of stone. They built stone buildings. A lot of times, a lot of early explorers saw this and said, well, the California Indians they didn't build great architecture. They did, but their architecture went back into the ground, and their architecture was mental. It was the creation stories, the songs, and they spent so much time building things like that. They didn't have to build this. If they lived in Arizona, they would probably build this. And then everything changes. Everything changes. That's why most of us are here, because everything changed. This is Sir Francis Drake. 1579, his golden hind sprung a leak, and he had to careen the ship for about 5 weeks. He chose an area that was suitable for careening a ship, which means like on the low tide, let it go over to the side. And somewhere in our area to the west, probably Drake's Bay, possibly Bodega Bay, or somewhere in between. The ethnographic accounts from his visit make it very much sound like Southern Pomo or Coast Miwok, Bodega Miwok people, from the description of baskets and ceremonies and what people were saying. But he didn't really do much. He was here for about 5 weeks and he left. And a lot of old historians used to say he didn't really have an effect on California. And I would say, phooey. Of course he did. He had, was it 60 or 80 sailors on the ship. And all the Miwok people were coming and going, or the Southern Pomo coming and going. And they were trading and exchanging. And I'm not sick. But if I breathe in your face, who knows? Now, if I'm an English sailor and I'm carrying certain things that you don't have an immunity to, and I breathe in your face, I might be leaving behind a lot when we sail away. Disease. So I look at the population estimates that came from the missionaries, from the Padres, and they say, well, California had about this many people. It's like, possibly, but it's always seemed low to me. And I have a feeling that, first, they undercounted the population. And secondly, 100 to 200 years earlier, there had been a lot of death from disease, from Drake, and some of the other explorers. Sarmenio was there a few years later. At Bodega Head, I've seen reference to 2 or 3 ceramic sherds from China that are being porcelain, that are too recent to be from Cermenio or Drake, but they're like early 1600s, like 1605, 1610. Where do they come from? Well, there's 5 beautiful freshwater springs at Campbell Cove at David Head. Some of you have probably seen them. And they were mapped after about 1600. And galleons, I think, would come in to get fresh water. And that's more people breathing and having, contact with native people. So we don't really know about the disease back then, but it probably played a role in these numbers. Speed up to the mission era. This is mission number 21 that we're in, or on top of. Mission San Francisco Solano was the 21st and last of the missions. It was the only mission in California not founded under the authority of Spain. It was founded under authority of Mexico. Because in between number 20, which was San Rafael, and 21, Solano, Mexican independence was gained in 1821. So this is kind of a different mission. It probably would not have been here except for the fact that the Russians were over at Fort Ross, and Spain, and then later Mexico and Russia were playing like this chess game. And by putting the mission here, you could block the Russian expanse, which also San Rafael was to do. But anyway, there we are, way up here at the top. Here we are today. Now, this chapel that we're in isn't the mission, but it's constructed on top of the original mission chapel. And according to archaeologists, it's only about 12 inches off the footprint. But this is the chapel built by Vallejo, for the city. But there was a chapel here made of wood. Later there was a large church made of adobe, and I'll show you that in just a minute. This mission brought in people from all those tribes I mentioned: Southern Pomo, Coast Miwok, Wapo, Patna. But the people that first came here to this mission had already been in the mission in San Francisco. And Father Altamira, the founding father, brought almost 200 Indian workers with him who came from the mission in San Francisco, but were originally from here to build the mission. Because the Padres do not build the mission, and the Sergeant of the Guards don't build the mission. These missions were built by Native people. And this whole foundation of this city, of Sonoma, was built by Indian people, whether voluntarily or not. Here's an illustration for 1791, and that's a soldier from the San Francisco Presidio pursuing or fighting Saklan, which is a Miwok tribe, Saklan people in their own village over in Contra Costa County. And I show this because in a little bit I'm going to talk about the Lanceros, these mounted soldiers with these really long spears. Look at that. So you have 3 native men, Miwok men, trying to fend off a Spaniard on horseback with a very long spear. And that was going on all the time too. Now this is a painting from Mission San Francisco. See, it's not here. And it just shows native people sort of doing their thing. This was by a famous artist, 1816. And they're playing the gambling game. They're outside native dormitories and they're gambling at the mission. A little glimpse into life at the mission. So people say, why? Trust me. People say, why? How do people come to the mission? And being the archaeologist here for so many years, I've heard people say, I've listened to tourists in the old days, and you hear someone talking, they've never been here, they're probably not from California, and you get the impression that they think this mission had like 800 old white guys wearing robes. And they're confusing it with like a monastery. Didn't have 800 old white guys wearing robes. I've talked to other people who say everybody was a slave here. They were all brought here against their will. Some were, but not everybody. I've heard other people say they all came to, be baptized. That wasn't true. And I've heard also that they came because there was so much food here. I'm not sure about that either. So imagine this. I used to think about this when I used to have my office right next door. I looked out at the plaza, and I was trying to think, what if a flying saucer landed one day? Like 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon in summer, when the plaza's full of people. Well, first thing, everybody's going to back out. You know, you're going to back off, and then the military's going to come in. First, the police. They're going to put up the stay back signs. But everybody's going to be waiting to see what happens. You know, waiting to see what happens. This was before cell phones and, you know, iNews and all those things. So you got to be there to see it. And you're waiting because it's like, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened. Here's some foreign people in strange new flying machines. They come out and, you know, what are they eating? And what do they give you? And you're a little bit afraid, but you're also curious. The missions were kind of like that. You know, when the missions first set up, especially if they brought people back who had originally been from here, people came because they were curious. You know, they came because they were curious. And there was food, you know, they shared the food. It wasn't necessarily better than native food, but, you know, it was different. You do that for a while. You go on vacation, you do that. And then first thing you know, in some different language than yours, you're raising your hand and swearing an oath to the Constitution and whatever. And, you know, you become a Christian, but you may not have realized that. And once they became Christians, once they were, you know, sworn in, they couldn't leave. And when it got time to go back, and you kind of got bored, you found out you can't go back. Well, the heck with that. In the middle of the night, you slip away and you take off. Then they send the guys with blue spears to get you. Because once you were part of the mission, you were part of the mission. Not that it's like a cult or anything like that. But you couldn't really get out of it. But if you never was baptized, you could. And so think about a spaceship. You know, would you go see a spaceship? But what if they said, okay, everybody get in here, we're leaving? Most of us wouldn't do that. And that's what happened to a lot of Native people. And that's why there were a lot of Native people in the missions who, on the outside, yeah, they kind of went there on their own. They weren't drug in chains, but they couldn't leave them. And that's kind of a funny thing there. You know, you're waiting to see the aliens. Of course, the Mars is storm area. Is anyone going to Area 51 tomorrow? Oh, no. So, you know, you're waiting to see, are they friendly? And, you know, that could turn into something. And with the missions, it did. And probably the most terrible thing about the missions was disease. Because you came in contact with them with foreign disease. We'll talk about that in just a minute. This is from a mission down south. You know, some people, when they realize, you know, they just split. And depending on, you know, where they were as far as conversion, they could either go or not. There are cases where, you know, people rose up. This is a famous death of a padre down south, not here. This mission actually got attacked in 1827. How's that for the historians? 1827. Tribes from the east of here attacked. They burned. They didn't destroy the mission itself, but they destroyed the native structures, which at the time were still conical, tooling-covered structures that burned more easily. And they attacked. They burned the village. They took off. These were the Christian Indians, the Neophytes living in the village. 2 years later, tribes attacked the mission in San Rafael and did a whole lot more damage. They destroyed the mission there. So not everybody liked the missions. In fact, I would say that probably most of the native people didn't like the missions. But there were so many other things happening. The missions were running their cows and horses out in the outskirts, and they were destroying the feed for the elk and the deer. And there were things happening with the environment where the native life cycle and food subsistence patterns were breaking down, and that caused some people to come to the missions for food. So the early historians say, yeah, they came in because they were starving, they had no food, but they forget why there was no food. It was because the missions were here, with thousands of cows and horses and goats and sheep. Here's a painting, 1887, a little fanciful, and you know, because we don't have a painting from the 1820s or 1830s, but this one shows the native village to the right. You see the houses back there? Actually on both sides. Those are the conical dwellings I was talking about that were burned. And some might have been there, but the truth is the village was mostly probably where you're all sitting. It was south of the mission. It was south over on the other side of the plaza. And there are several accounts of that it was to the south. Also, the stream that comes down, you don't see it over here, it goes underground. I don't think you would have people living upstream on the creek right at the mission because they were sensitive. But they were here somewhere. You see the cemetery on the right, that's the new church. That's the church that was built in 1832, 1833. Replacing the old wooden church. Here's another sort of fanciful illustration. This is one that we used to have, maybe we still have as an exhibit here. This one also shows the dwellings and the background. And I think that's because of artist's perspective. If you're going to paint the mission, you want to paint looking at the front of the mission, which means you're not going to see what's behind you. So you're going to put the native village out and the outskirt out there. So there it is. The old church, chapel, and the new church here. And then one more. And I show this one because of that A. Can everybody see the white A? That's archaeologists in the 1950s did work here, and they discovered several buildings we didn't know about, and they named them A, B, C. And A is actually C. I don't know why I put an A on it, because the archaeologists call that building C. And I've often wondered about building C. In a lot of the missions in California, the Padres had these special dormitories built for all the unmarried girls. And they locked them in. And if you go, when the day sun's up, and you look at the memorial just outside this window, that has 896 names of Native people who died here, you'll see that a lot of them are women names. They're female. A lot of them are kids also. And, interesting. So, the unmarried women are being locked up for much of the day. And the padre or the guard walks by, and they're in cramped quarters, and disease was rampant. And it was very poorly ventilated, and there were problems. So why did the Padres do that? Why did the Padres lock unmarried girls and women up?
Protect their virtue?
Yeah. And that's what this slide is going to show you. I'm not a fan of missions, and I'm not an opponent of missions. The odd thing about the missions is you had the Padres, and you had the guards. And they had separate silos, as we like to say these days. They had a different reporting silo. The padre could not tell the sergeant of the guards what to do. And the sergeant of the guard couldn't tell the padre how to preach. They had different reporting chains. Here's an interesting, anybody ever read Conrad's Heart of Darkness? So, the earlier California missions that were established by Spain especially, but even these later ones also, the average person becoming a priest, a padre, tended to be a little more educated than the average person becoming a Spanish soldier. So you had an imbalance of education. The padre tended to be here for more humanistic reasons. And sometimes the sergeants were here because they got in trouble elsewhere. This was sort of, in the European view, where we're at right now is upriver. This was the end of the river. And now, for Native people, this was home. And for all of us, this is home. But if you were coming from Spain, or even Mexico City, and you had to come and serve 5 years in the military in Sonoma, it's like, what am I going to do here? This is so far away from anything. So the guards tended not to volunteer to come here. But the priest did. And that's the funny thing. Remember Peace Corps in the 60s? I had friends that wanted to go to the most extreme place because they had this calling to give back and to do good work. So you have this dichotomy between the priests who are here for theoretically lofty reasons, and a lot of the soldiers who are here because this was like being sent to Alaska in wintertime in our army, or sent to Siberia. And so the guys that got in trouble for drinking too much or abusing women too much, sometimes would end up in the California missions. And it created these problems, really ugly problems. So the priests would lock the girls up, lock the unmarried women up. And that was the case here. We had, I wrote down, I can't read it, the 4 priests that we had, padres and fathers. And then we had one particular, Sergeant Ortega, who was kind of salty. And he was here at the end, and you have to read some of the stories. You can see how it would be kind of weird, not having the padre in charge of the soldiers, which would have made more sense to me than having the soldiers in charge of the padre. But it led to problems. So there's Building C up in the upper right corner. That's as defined by the archaeologists in the 1950s in Berkeley, Building C. I don't know that that was one of those dormitories for locking up women, but it sure looks like it. We came out a few years ago, we being State Parks and UC Berkeley, and we brought 3 generations of ground-penetrating radar equipment out, and we surveyed the lot. And the little green, the bluest area that we surveyed, see Building C tile floor shows up in the green down there. So we were trying to locate Building C and get a better handle on what the archaeologists had seen earlier. And then here we are superimposing our survey track on top of the earlier Berkeley excavations. And there's Building C here. The wall that currently encloses the compound here isn't big enough. I mean, the mission compound was bigger, and it changed over time as the mission grew. So it's just sort of a representative wall now. The mission's closed down. Mexico won its independence. The government wasn't all that cool about missions. They were expensive. They weren't necessarily paying their way. In 1834, they said close them, turn them over to civilian, business, military, and that went on. The people that were chosen to close the missions, some were better than others. Some went into it with a big heart, because when they closed the mission, they were supposed to divide up the land, the shovels, the horses, the corn, among the native people. Some people took that to heart, others didn't. Here, this is where Mariano Vallejo comes. Now, personally, I've always liked Vallejo, but I thought I would like Vallejo better when he was an old man, to have as a neighbor. As a younger man, I'm not so sure. How did Vallejo get all the land in the North Bay when he was supposed to be dividing it up among the people that were called the Neophytes? He managed to. But this is what Vallejo built. So we're in that little church down there at the far right before the big one. He built his Casa Grande, his large home. He built the Mexican barracks for soldiers he brought up from the Presidio. And there he is with his daughters and granddaughters there. An incredibly important person in California history. But you know what? California history is full of incredibly important people, most of whom we never hear about. You know, there were native people that resisted Vallejo, that fought to the stand, that gave their life trying to resist him being here. We don't even know their names, but we know Vallejo. We have Hearst Castle. We know the big people in history, but we don't know all the important people in history. Vallejo was an opportunist, and he was easily able to adapt, and that's why he did so well. So think about this, the Casa Grande, he's the big man here in charge of the northern frontier. He's living in a 2-story adobe house, every bit as large as the so-called Mexican barracks. It has like 50 soldiers in it. This enormous, beautiful, the largest house in Northern California, Mexican adobe. A few years later, he's now an American citizen. And he's living in a very New England-style, Yankee-style house that he imported around the Horn. He adapted, and he became beloved in the new city of Sonoma because he was able to do that. But if you read the history, and if you read the Native American ethnographic literature, you see Vallejo's name a lot, and it's not always very pleasant. Now, for years, I assumed that when people said, oh, Vallejo came, we hid, they were talking about his brother, Salvador. Because Salvador, who's the guy who right over there, Bill, we know he did some pretty terrible things. He was the one that would take the Christian armies, the Indian armies, and the Mexican armies, and go punish tribes for having eaten a Vallejo cow or something. And you eat a cow, they kill people in your village. And he did a lot of that. And in elderly life, you're thinking that, well, that wasn't Mariano, but it was both of them. You know, one's in control and one's got the army there. And they were creating an empire. And with Vallejo, you were either with them or you were not. you were outside. And the native people that aligned with him, he treated pretty well, for some part, for most part. Here's one right here, Chief Solano, the famous chief from the Fairfield area. Solano was actually called at this mission when he first met Vallejo, but he got in alignment with Vallejo and became one of his right-hand men. He raised 1,000 Patwin warriors, Suisun warriors, and did a lot of the punitive expeditions for Vallejo against the so-called wild tribes. Wild is a Norwegian, or it's a Norse word for self-willed. So remember growing up, you hear about the wild Indians, wild horses, wild bears, wild country. It was portrayed sometimes as a negative, but what it really means is these are people that are self-willed. They have their own life, and they don't necessarily want to do what you want them to do. They're self-willed. That's why you have to break a wild horse. You have to break its will. That's why you break its shoes. And that's what the mission was kind of about, breaking people so you could turn them into Spanish and later Mexican citizens. That's Vallejo with Solano's widow there. Anyway, cows were big here. Vallejo had a lot of cows. Now, some were his, and a lot of them belonged to the Indian people that had been in the mission, and according to Vallejo, they couldn't manage their business, or they asked him to watch their cows for them, like, wink, sure. But they might have actually done that, because Vallejo did afford them some protection. Once they walked away from Vallejo's land, they were at risk of all the other Mexican ranches here, who could take them and put them to work for free. So there was a little bit of everything going on, I think. But at the end of the day, Vallejo ended up with almost all the cows, and the land and everything else. And he didn't mess with his cows. I just found this in some Russian records that were recently translated. Here's an incident where the Russian guy up there, Vasily Zaboko, says, "Oh my God, we saw this happen. 35 cows got taken by Vallejo's people, and the next day Vallejo arrested 50 and shot 35 of them without finding out who was guilty." And so you didn't mess with the cows. Why would you mess with a cow or a horse? Because people were starving. And they figured if all these cows, some of which are supposedly theirs, they could eat one. Here's another very similar case in this one. So people resisted, sort of giving you another idea of the Lanceros. Imagine being on foot with a bow and arrow and seeing a guy coming your way with light armor with a 12, 15, 18-foot long spear on a horse coming at full speed. There was a mismatch. But the people resisted. Look at the blade this little girl's going to look at. So look at the spear blade on this. Imagine what's the horse do? 27 miles, real fast horse. How did that come match? There's Fort Ross. That's where the Russian guy came from to experience that. Vallejo sent one of his soldiers over to Bodega Bay to do some trading. His name was Miramontes. He went over in 1837 and he contracted smallpox. And he came back and not knowingly he spread it. And he stopped in Petaluma at the ranch, at Vallejo's ranch, and he came down to Townsend, Sonoma. And as a result, 60,000, maybe 80,000 Native people died in Northern California. That was the Miramontes smallpox epidemic. It almost killed all of Vallejo's workers over at Petaluma Adobe. He had like 2,000 of them over there. Just wipe people out. I did an excavation a few years ago, and I found a feature over there that came from that time. And what it showed is that as people were dying in the workers' village at Petaluma Adobe, the survivors were burning the houses and pushing everything into this big ditch. They were burying people separately, but then they were burning the house to get rid of anything that had been touched by smallpox. And in this ditch, we were finding whole household, accoutrements. Over here on the left is an entire shell bead manufacturing kit. We also found the drills and the whetstones, but it's like just amazing. And that's what the smallpox did. It just wiped out whole communities. And then the gold rush. You can imagine the gold rush happened here. This is San Francisco, right after the word got out. Look at all the ships. And then this next one, look there. San Francisco had to hire a harbor master. There were so many ships in the harbor, and guess what? They were all abandoned. So, you're over in England, or you're in South America, and you book passage on a ship to California to make your riches in gold. And along the voyage, everybody's talking about striking it rich, getting gold, becoming millionaires, living the highlight. They come into the bay, guess who gets off the ship first? The captain, the first mate, they all bail. And they take off for the gold fields. And there are all these ships just sitting out there. That's why every now and then on the news, when they're doing work in San Francisco, you see they hit a gold rush here, a ship, like 50 feet down. They took them all, burned them, and then built on top of them. And that's our financial period. The gold miners were kind of a crusty bunch. And that's where we start really using the word genocide for local people. There was genocide going on here. And whole communities were being destroyed. I won't speak through this. Here's a little fact here you might not have known. 1863 is when slavery was abolished in Sonoma. Did you know that? We think of slavery just on the East Coast, but they had a scam here. If you found a native child without parents, you could just take that person and put them in your home and have them work for you. Make your beds, make your food, clean your clothes. But some really bad people started thinking, well, what if we go to a village and kill all the adults and we discover the kids? So it was a pretty bad business. And in 1863, they finally put an end to it. And here in Sonoma, with some of the respectable people of Sonoma, sure, everybody had at least one Indian child servant. And Manifest Destiny, look at this painting. This is from 1872. See the buffalo being pursued, the native people are moving. Here comes the train. Here comes the East Coast to the West Coast. Manifest destiny. We have the right. It's our destiny to sweep across this entire continent, push anyone out of the way. If you're ever interested in reading about what really happened, there's a whole bunch of good books. The best one is this one on the far left, American Genocide, which just came out recently, all about what happened here in California. So let's just talk about today. This happened 2 months ago. You see anybody you know there? There's Gavin Newsom. He's meeting with leaders of California tribes, issuing an apology on behalf of the state of California for what happened here. This was earlier this summer.
Where was it taken?
I don't know where, I see some friends of mine in the group. I don't know, do you know where that was at? Where was that ceremony held? I see Reno over there.
Yeah, I thought it was over in, was it over in Sacramento area?
Probably.
Yeah,
actually,
I don't know exactly
close
where.
to home. But that's that's something you don't see every day. Here's native people. Some of whom are in this room today. Just various important artists and craftspeople and political leaders in our area. These are all people whose families were in the mission or were trying not to be in the mission, both ways, living a life. And, if you see people on the sidewalk, you might not have a clue unless you go to their home or go to a ceremony. Because they're living with a foot in both worlds, And that's hard. I only have to live in one world. But I have friends that live in two worlds, and they have to go to school in the day or go to their professions or their jobs, and then they have to be who they really are, which means observe ceremonial calendars and have certain rules I don't have, and they're trying to retain that culture, and they're doing a beautiful job. I'm going to go through these really fast. Some of the tribes that were at the mission have casinos now, and the casinos are getting to the point where they're doing some really good things for the tribe. I don't know about any of those except for Brayton, but I know that Brayton will have paid off their loans later this year, early next year, which means that anything coming in goes into the tribe. And they've already been able to hire lawyers, environmental planners, historians. They have food programs for the elderly, education programs for the kids. They're teaching language. They're doing a lot of things. Hopefully all casinos do that. But theirs does. But not all tribes have casinos, and not all tribes, even in our area, have their status. This is a Wapo man who last year, 2 years ago, got turned down the application to reclaim their federal status as a tribe. And hopefully down the road, they'll do it again, and hopefully they'll succeed. The difference in having your federal status and not is day and night. And understand that no tribe gave up their federal status as a sovereign nation. It was taken from them as part of assimilation. Some were able to hold on to it, some have more recently reclaimed it. My late friend Bertha Stewart, in 1985 she was the oldest living Tolowa up on the Smith River, and she's photographed here. Here she is in 1902 when she was 2 years old. I did an interview with her, and we're a beautiful, beautiful woman. And we're talking, and she says, you know, I can't speak my language, but I know some of the words. And I said, oh, you didn't grow up with your language? And she said, well, I did, but then I got sent to boarding school. And they wouldn't let me speak my language. And she said, but I did, because she's kind of a rebel. She said, but I did. I said, what happened? And she said, when I got 8, it hurt too much. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, anytime I got caught speaking, you know, the teacher would take a ruler and it would hit my hand. And as I got older, 8, she hit harder. And it hurt too much. So her language got beat out of her. And I have lots of other Native friends who say, yes, same story for my grandmother and my grandfather. So we beat culture. We being in the government, tried to beat culture out of Indian people to force them to assimilate into a society that wasn't going to let them assimilate anyway. So now they're left with feet in 2 worlds. But you know what? Oops, very good. There was a famous t-shirt earlier this year that said, so what does it say? She was warned, but she persisted, or something like that. Remember that one? I think about, not political, but I think about the tribes. And they were warned. Well, here's the boarding school where Bertha went. They were warned, but they persisted. And I'll show you that in just a minute. This is what I grew up with. This is 1950s. I didn't have this. I had a bag sack for my lunch. But this is just a kid's lunchbox from 1955. And this is what a lot of us grew up with. These are gum cards from 1933. You know. But anyway, nevertheless, they persisted. You know, with all the racism, the genocide, the people survived, and they persisted. These women are doing face tattoos again. This is Julia Parker, a Pomo lady at Yosemite, doing baskets. I love this one. You know, basket art is just, it looked like baskets were going to disappear 20 years ago, and now there's more basket weavers than ever, I think, except, you know, like 500 years ago. There are elder student language programs going on with a lot of the tribes. There's just lots of good things happening. My friends here, Billy Rain and Lester, you guys raise your hand here, are visiting from Kashaya. They had a dream of dancing at their ancestral place called Matini at Fort Ross. And they haven't been able to dance almost 200 years since the Russians came. And they had a dream, and their dream came through. And here they are, the first day, they're excavating the central sacred fire hearth for what's going to become a dance floor. And here, later in the year, is I think the first dance. The first series of dances, observances. That's Fort Ross in the background. So just, you know, it took 200 years to come home. Well, what's 200 years when you're talking about 17,000 or 30,000 years? They persisted. They didn't give up, you know. Look at there. That's cultural survival. 1906, 1907, and you speed up to 2013. The same blood, the same dance, the same song. It doesn't go away. As long as there's one person, it doesn't go away. And I don't know if it would go away then. Billy Ray Lester's group is called Sunun Shunong, which is Huckleberry Heights, I think, in the language. And they've been all over the world. Here we are, I say we because I got to go with them on this trip, in Moscow, dancing for Russian audiences. On their way to Siberia to perform at a festival.
Russian.
So the last few slides, what's my time? Okay, I'm just about out of time here. We're in a mission. We make a lot about the missions. Missions are good for tourism. This mission attracts people to Sonoma. It used to do more before wineries came. I think wine is the big draw now. But the mission is still a big draw. And we've romanticized the missions. And a lot of this goes back to the novel Ramona, which people all over the world fell in love with that story and wanted to see missions. And then all of a sudden, we had some architects who did the mission revival. They started designing buildings that reflect mission influence in California as a way to get people to move to California to buy homes or to work. That was mostly like 1890s, 1920s. And as a result, the mission is the thing, not the people, the mission. So until recently, what was it, 4th grade, they all had to do these mission projects. I have a 13-year-old son, and when he was approaching 4th grade, he was like, I can't do it, because I don't have the skill to build a mission. And I'd probably want to burn it anyway, I'm sorry, but I don't think I'd want to build a mission. And I don't think they do that now. Nothing bad about missions. What we need to do, though, is we need to look at the mission and the people. And I think we're doing that. We see a lot of statues of Vallejo around. Nothing wrong with that. We even see statues of Chief Solano, probably the only Native person in this area where you can actually see the statue. Except for Chief Katati over here. Those are local Native American names. Did you know that? Katati, Sonoma, Marin, Kaluma, Napa. Did you know that? Kanakta. So Native people are still here, but we don't even know that that's their names for these places. See the 3 cemeteries? A, B, C. A is the original mission cemetery. B is the second mission. C is a place that Peter Meyerhoff, where's Peter? Peter found some maps showing another mission cemetery. It could be it's mismapped, it should be number 8. It looks like it's a separate cemetery, possibly from smallpox. It might be the smallpox people. But we have these cemeteries in town. So a few years ago, we decided to make people visible, because Vallejo's visible with the statues, the name of the city, and the submarine. A lot of important people that aren't native are visible, but the people that built this city under our feet are buried here aren't visible. So taking an idea from the Vietnam Memorial, which is beautiful, I think, we came up with what's just outside the door, the Sonoma Mission Indian Memorial. We created a nonprofit in 1996. We dedicated the monument in 1999. These are some of the really shakers and movers and shakers. Betty Allen foremost. I moved my office here in 93. A week later, I got a phone call from this lady I'd never met, Betty Allen, saying, now that you're here, what are you going to do about our cemetery? And it's like, I don't know, is there a problem? What's the problem with it, She said, no one knows it's here. So because of Betty's pushing, and all these other fine people, Adrian Martinez is a local architect. Probably a lot of you know Adrian. The late Lane Panola, wonderful, actually, his brother's here. And Ed Castillo, who was a professor at Sonoma State, and all those great people up there, many of whom are now gone. We banded together, raised the money, got permission from the state, built the monument, and dedicated it. So if you've never seen it, there's 896 names, all Native people that are buried somewhere in this vicinity who died here on there. We used the Latin names because some of the elders felt uncomfortable using the given names. We wanted to avoid the names of the dead, but we felt it was okay to use the names that the Padres gave people. If you look closely at the monument, you'll see we missed about a dozen names. There's a dozen names on that monument that they're not Latin. They're Native names that kind of got their way in. I think Old Man Coyote played a trick on us. But that's what that's about. It's very interesting, though. So there's the names. We want to have asterisks for children's names. On the day that we dedicated it, we closed this side of town. We had a PA system. We had 25 VIPs, including the governor, the mayor, and all, some of the oldest elders in the county. Each read 10 names of children, because we couldn't read all 896 names. It still took an hour and a half. We read all the names of the children, and it broadcast across the plaza. It was interesting. We probably had, were any of you here for that day? We had a few hundred people right here, and then we had people coming up. And it was a very moving day. But It was interesting though, nothing is without controversy. So while we were building the monument, people were talking about canonizing Father Sarah. And there was a lot of argument, pro and anti, as you know. And that continued right up until a couple years ago when the Pope canonized Sarah. Our project got misunderstood. And there were people that said, you're trying to glorify the church, aren't you? You know? And then you get a call, because I was the liaison, I'd get a call the next day, you're trying to embarrass the church, aren't you? And it's like, no, we're not trying. That's why we like the Vietnam Memorial. You can go to the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., and you could be a hawk or a dove. You can be someone that supported the war or someone that fought against the war. And you all go away with a tear in your eye. Everybody gets something from that memorial. And that's what we wanted to do here in Sonoma. So that if you're the most defender of the mission or the most anti-mission, you all get something from it. So the Monsignor was one of our VIPs. And a radical Indian professor was one of our, and they were shaking hands and we pulled it off. Here's Ed. Ed's the radical professor. He was younger then too. He's like me, he's slowing down now. Ed's a missionary. He's in Senyo Kauai. He used to teach Native American Studies at Sonoma State. And he was one of the leaders of the Alcatraz takeover in 1969. So when he was announced as the president of our committee to build a memorial, people kind of thought, well, it's going to be a really radical thing. And it wasn't. You know, Ed realized, no, we have an opportunity to do something really special here. And he did it, and we did it. Yeah, well, last couple of things. You wonder what it was like to see genocide here? We're seeing it right now on our TV and in our newspaper. Genocide and conquest is still going on. Everything that happened to my friends here from Kashaya and their families, maybe some of your families, is happening right now, right in front of us in the Amazon. Deforestation, these terrible fires, and leaving people stranded. You know, I really worry about the fate of all these native tribes in the Amazon. And it's like a time machine, and we went forward instead of backwards. It's still going on. So, for my purpose, what we did here with the memorial, and what I wanted to do with this talk tonight, is make people visible. And not like in the Western movies or, you know, the old lunchboxes, but just a cultural tradition that's continuing, that's had a lot of problems in the last 500 years with conquest and genocide, but did not go away and will not go away. And in 1,000 years, if we're all gone, if we destroy ourselves, you know, there will still going to be native people here, I have no doubt. Because this is home, they don't have anywhere else to go. Some of us can go back somewhere, or maybe we'll go to Mars or something. But the traditional people I know will be here in 1,000 years, with or without us. And I hope with us. I think that would be really grand. If there's anybody that has any more interest in questions, that's what I was going to say. I was going to try to finish about 10 minutes ago. It looks like everybody's awake. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer. And if you don't, I'll be happy to go home and take my shoes off. Did you, first of all, is this what you came for? Did you?
Yes.